Okay, so good afternoon. A little late today. I'm Anto Budiarjo, and this is Monday Live, something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3. Just in case you're wondering who we are, we're listed on mondaylive.org, and just to highlight the point that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post comments and questions and chat on the Zoom chat so we can make this as interactive as possible. This being April, we are talking about the cloud and buildings, and our agenda, normal news and trend. We'll probably try and keep that brief since we started late, and then we'll talk about connecting buildings to the cloud and have an open discussion about that. So before we get started on that, Ken, what's going on?
Lots of automated buildings. I think the biggest thing in message is that the way we perceive this new site working is starting to work. We're starting to get a lot of our contributing editors and our sponsors basically interacting and having discussions and basically posting stuff. A lot of it has moved off, more than I had thought, has moved off to LinkedIn, which we don't really have any problem to. It's just a matter that our contributing editors, you sometimes have to follow them out of automated buildings into LinkedIn. But some of the discussions going on LinkedIn by our editors and sponsors from stuff they've posted is great. So the way we're kind of looking at that is automated buildings is sort of the library, the contextual place that you would find get started on this as you kind of move into LinkedIn. That's kind of the like going out into the hall or going for coffee and chatting to some folks. So it seems to work, and when I see something significant happening on LinkedIn, I try to link it back to automated buildings. So that seems to all be working, and I'm pretty happy with that. I've got a bunch of stuff going on right now. I'm just working on my article for Connected Contractor, and we're talking about the dawn of this new era. And we're also working on a keynote for Control Con, which is coming up in a few weeks, and the same thing. So we're hard at it. I've basically been 50 years in the control industry, has allowed me to see several eras, and you know, there's patterns inside of them. I mean, the patterns repeat themselves and the timelines become blurry as one ends. The new errors evolve inside of each of the other errors too. It's interesting the way that all watches. But the one we're coming into is just totally incredible. I think it's nothing like I've ever seen in the last 50 years. And I think it's going to have a greater impact than even the internet. So that's a pretty bold statement, but it definitely is. And in the call for Control Trend, their overarching theme is the new era. And as the industry continues to embrace the role of augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and cloud-based solutions, which ties in well to our talk today, I'm lobbying to try and get this new era called the environmentation era, because it's the combination of being fueled by environment and automation. So we're all going to become environmentalists. Wow, I can't talk today. Anyway, the other couple of posts that I saw that were pretty interesting is we've got a discussion going on of virtual technicians taking jobs from the BMS industry, and there's some good discussion going on that doesn't look like that's going to be a particular problem. And that's followed up with another LinkedIn discussion where Keith is teaching GPT, which I thought was interesting. So what he starts out asking it questions, and when it kind of either comes back with the wrong answer or stalls, he actually jumps in and gives it information, and then it re-asks the question, and it then comes back with a better answer. So it's an interesting thing as to how we're going to have to train GPT to come up with more complete answers. Interesting, I find. Anyway, back to you.
Great, thank you, Ken. I just have this one slide, and I've brought up this this firm IoT Analytics that does this every quarter, and it's really an interesting insight into what's going on in big companies. Basically, what they do is that they capture transcripts of quarterly calls from big companies, CEOs, and they just analyze it and pull out all of the keywords that are mentioned and compare it to last year. So it's a little bit complicated to read this chart, but basically the vertical axis here is how much a particular subject has increased since the last quarter. So this is the first quarter of 23 versus the last quarter of 22. So it's not surprising that ChatGPT and all the related subjects is right there. It's grown by 140%, which is not surprising at all.
Yeah, right.
But also interesting, some Industry 4.0 stuff is there. Specifically, predictive maintenance has this sort of significant increase. I don't really know where that came from. Metaverse is declining as importance. And then way over on the x-axis is the importance. In other words, how important the specific word is in the report. And so inflation and economic uncertainty is obviously there in everybody's minds. But AI and labor market is very much predominant there. It's what they call this quadrant, high growing in importance. So this is interesting. The link, I've put the link here so you can follow it and see a lot of the sort of analysis of what's going on here.
I wonder if there's something in the industrial segment driving that Industry 4.0. Because it's industrial automation, machine vision, 3D printing, those are all industrial words, right?
Yeah. Industry 4.0 is obviously as a big subject that's relatively new, so it's driving a lot of that, and maybe it's countering the shortages, which is sort of the past problem that
so Anto, do you think the CEOs are talking about are mostly Fortune 500 and focused on and more, and out of that mostly industrials?
I think it's a cross section of global Fortune 500 companies. The link will actually give you exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if that's the case, then it doesn't surprise me that the Industry 4.0 and the AI are prominent. Yeah.
Off the charts.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think there's also an interesting overlap of the machine learning AI and the layoff and workforce, because those two go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Either one is the consequence of the other, whichever way you want to read that.
Yep. I always find these quite interesting because it's an interesting snapshot of what's going on. So that's me. Rick, a few updates from you.
Yeah, real quick. The Young Professionals Group had their kickoff meeting last week, and look for a word from Audrey and Monica about what the next steps are on that. Excited that is off to a quick start. Then we were just participating, both Monica and I were at this Kansas City Energy Exchange kickoff meeting. It just ended a half hour ago. And while it's mostly about how buildings need to be built better and how building codes are taking shape around the country, there's also the intent for it to then transition into, how do technologies and grid interactivity start to become the norm. And so we're excited to be participating in that. And then there also will be some opportunities for the coalition to team up with some of the member organizations of that. And yes, right here in little old Kansas City, there's an awful lot going on relative to the advancement of building technologies and how technologies impact buildings and grids. So it's kind of a fun session, very encouraging. And then still opportunities where we're starting to record some video podcast segments both from a technical and non-technical standpoint. So let Monica know if you want to be part of that, or me, and we'll go from there. That's it.
Thank you, Rick. Just a link board that's here for various links if you need them. So that this slide deck, as I mentioned earlier, is available on mondaylive.org. Any other thoughts before we jump into the cloud?
Rick, I was kind of expecting you to post that link from I can't remember who it was, the company that Samsung, I think it was, right? Whose employees were posting their internal company source code on ChatGPT to help them debug it.
That's the wrong way to teach it.
I didn't have time to make that an official mention, but maybe we'll put that on maybe we'll write that up, because I think my tagline on it was, how did I say it? New tech, Murphy's Law.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it? Yeah.
Anything that can go wrong will, but it was human error, right?
Right.
The use of a new tool doesn't preclude people from making dumb human mistakes. So we'll probably write that up, because that was a good one.
Yeah, I think so.
Misapplying a tool is not a new thing.
All right.
Unintended consequences, a whole new thought.
Getting a screw loose with a hammer is a whole.
Okay. We get the point. All right, there's nothing else. We move on.
Yep.
All right. So the cloud and buildings. So last week we started talking about the cloud, and I sort of framed the conversation in saying that computing fundamentally has this sort of IPOS concept: input, processing, output, and storage. Any computer looks like this basically, and in a distributed computing system like a building automation control system, the same happens, except that it's just distributed across the network. That's really the idea of it. And the conversation last week is about how we take this model into the multi-cloud computing environment, where you have multiple public cloud vendors and a private cloud infrastructure for, typically in our case, the building owner, and then the on-prem. That is, we want to make that look like it's part of the multi-cloud computing. So we talked in a lot of generalities about this, but what we didn't really talk about a lot is how this happens, how this on-prem to cloud connectivity happens. All right, and on the other hand, we all know that pretty much everybody on the screen, and probably many people in the audience, already do that today. They install a box if they're trying to do analytics, or they're trying to suck up the data from a building into the cloud system. They would install some kind of gateway box that will extract data from the systems in the building and then put it up to the cloud. Everybody does that, which means that everybody does their own thing. So it's not an open standard way of doing that, although obviously many of them use pretty decent IT standards to do that. So we actually want to dig in quite a bit more on this. And in the Coalition for Smarter Buildings, there is a committee, an open appliance committee that was started in January to try and sort of tackle how we can possibly standardize this interface between the cloud and the building on-prem. And we've decided to call it the Interoperability Building Box. In other words, it's a box that enables interoperability in buildings. And that's the name that we've given it. And what is this all about? So imagine a box, and the most important thing is that the box is located on-prem. So it is on-prem always. That's what the IBB, that's where it sits. But it can be either a physical device that is installed by a BAS contractor, a system integrator, or vendor, or it can actually be running virtually in the building's data center that is typically going to be owned by the owner or some other entity that the owner controls. Right, so it's a box that's either a separate box or running virtually. So it's basically a piece of software. What does it do? So it does 5 things at the high level. First of all, it can enable control head end of control systems to be running on this box, right? Which is a typical sort of legacy architecture of a supervisory kind of head end that runs somewhere. So it can do that. It also provides a secure communication mechanism with systems that are on-prem, so southbound, as it were, into the premise itself. It also provides secure communication up northbound to the internet cloud. All right, so it goes down and up. The next point is basically it says that this is probably the primary function of what the IBB does. Is it enables interoperation and messaging between these systems, whether it's south or northbound, either on-prem or on cloud. So it enables all of that to happen. And last thing is it enables local data storage. And we're not talking about massive data storage, obviously, because that's typically not best done in a box like this. But data to improve performance and efficiency. So we're talking about buffers and caching and other sort of things like that. So those are the 5 main functions. And really, we think about the box as being something that building owners can easily and safely specify. They can specify, if they want smarter buildings, that they would like an IBB compliant box, an IBB compliant device or system in their building. Right? And they should then be able to source that from one of many vendors, all matching the IBB specification, and with different configurations for all the way from small boxes of probably sub $1,000 to very large boxes for large buildings. And really, the way to think about this is that this is a box, or this is a place where vendors of software, obviously, can safely install their application and service, right? So rather than, what I was saying earlier, people are installing boxes every time they need to get something. The idea is that they would no longer need to install the box. They would just install the software in an IBB that will actually do what it is that they want to do. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. The other key thing is that this provides the owner the ability to manage this box, the IBB, remotely and securely, and it can be done either by the owner itself or the IT organization or the owner, or could be subcontract or contracted out to a managed service provider or some other entity, right? But it's something that it can then be predictable, rather than, again, all of these boxes that's found in buildings that are the responsibility of different vendors that are really not centrally managed. So this is a key attribute for it. So it's really a standard way to gather and host on-prem applications and services. That's really what the IBB box is. Visually, think about it like this. It's a box that's on-prem, but it's got its head up in the cloud, as it were. Its main sort of resource is, you can think about it as a mini data center. So as compute resources, network management, interface orchestrator to make everything all work. There is an admin function that can then be used by authorized administrators to install and manage applications and users and access and everything else. And the actual applications are containerized application services, whatever else that you actually want in there, right? So the model is actually, just think about it as a data center, except that it's very small, right? But it uses the same mechanisms as a typical data center, just in that constrained environment. And you then basically enables that to be part of the multi-cloud that I had on a slide before. And so a few use cases. Hosting existing systems. So if you think of a legacy app that may be running in a box under the desk of the janitorial closet or something like that, that can be put into the IBB as a legacy app, just connects to the legacy devices and across the internet to users. A sort of rear looking use case there. A future, sorry, too far. Okay. This is probably the most interesting one today, because this is what a lot of people are doing, to actually having a gateway. Again, what I was saying earlier about people installing boxes. In this scenario, you just install a gateway, that same functionality goes into the IBB, and that feeds up into the IDL in the cloud, and then feeding in to analytics, obviously connected in this case to the legacy devices. But you can combine all of that, and there's no reason why you can have both, and down the road, any other applications that the owner may need down the road, right? So it's a very flexible architecture that is all driven by containerization technologies, which is very mature in the IT space. Took a stab at doing an IBB on the Smarter Stack depiction. The purpose of the IBB is listed there, to provide choice, being able to be specified, to provide security, manageability, and multi-tenancy in terms of what goes into that, who's going to operate it, everybody from who's going to use it and consume it, integrators, managed service providers, facility management, IT departments, etc. The way it gets delivered to the users, typically web dashboards, other UIs and APIs, and the applications that can run on it. Pretty much any application that you can put on a Smarter Stack. And the reason I've sort of depicted the IBB here as a big box is that goes back to the comment we were talking about last week, is that an application could easily be sitting outside of the IBB, meaning in the cloud somewhere, or if it's more appropriate for the application to be running on the IBB, it can do so, right? So because the architecture is cloud native, which is something that we'll talk about next week, it gives you that flexibility. Things like data exchange, middleware can obviously be either, again, in the cloud, gateways could be on IBB, et cetera, et cetera. So you can almost sort of put these boxes, either you can move them left and right as an, depending on the application. The same goes with data. And there are obviously big cloud data stores, IDL, that really has to stay in the cloud, as well as sort of public data. But things like time series database and logs could be at least initially put in the IBB, and then pushed up to the cloud, some kind of scenario like that. Systems, all kind of systems, it doesn't really matter what, and different kind of physical entities. So really, this puts the IBB as a key part of the on-prem interface, and really the aim of this is to make the whole thing cloud native. And cloud native, I mentioned briefly, we're going to dig into that a little bit more next week. But it just sort of makes the whole infrastructure look like it's the cloud. And with that, I'm going to, that's the last slide I have, and open it up to some discussion. Thoughts?
So, Anto, I wasn't able to make our Wednesday call. Was a lot of this talked about on Wednesday, I assume?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing it for the first time, and I'm trying to reconcile the functionality you described just now versus the 5 or 6 things that you said it's supposed to do in that one slide. If you could go back. Keep going. Yeah, right there. Host control heads, I see that. What I'm not seeing are managing secure communications, enabling interoperation, message exchange. I could see the local data storage, but those 3 in particular, when you talked about it, you didn't talk about any software development in the box itself that's going to do items 2, 3, and 4 there.
That's actually being discussed in the group.
Yep.
I think the issue there that is being discussed is that communications up to the cloud is relatively easy, right? Because that's you think about that as just using internet pipes, the way
right.
the way you should do it using internet technologies.
Mhm.
Securing communications with on-prem systems. One of the discussions right now is, for example, whether the IBB will actually have I/O ports on it,
Mhm.
right? Or the possibility of RS-485 and other sort of network interfaces, because
Right.
that sort of makes the IBB a little bit more complicated. But that's actually one of the questions that we'd love to know, whether that seems to be the something that's needed, or whether we can actually skip that.
Right.
The bullet number 4 is obviously enabled once you have the two communications up and down.
Yeah, no, I think as sort of an independent box that can do the secure communications up and down, but the fourth item, the interoperability, some mechanism where you can specify, I want this information from this system, and right, that functionality is has to be created as well. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Yeah, I think we're defining something here that would be great to have, but the question is, how does it get developed in the marketplace?
Yeah, and that's the interoperation. That bullet number 4 there is really about the interfaces.
Yep.
Between systems, and that's also another area that we're very focused on in the committee.
Yep. Okay.
And several people on the committees are actually in the audience. Al Putnam, I see here. Pete Scanlon. I don't really see anybody else. So if you guys have any things you want to chime in, just say something on chat.
And if I'm not muted, I will just talk about, from the Coalition for Smarter Building standpoint, sort of sponsoring or encouraging this committee to move forward is, for a couple of primary reasons. One is that a lot of vendors are already doing containerized solutions, and the community of owners, is seeing this move to a new kind of technology, a new kind of gateway, a new kind of place to run these solutions. And it just makes sense that with where technology is going, for the coalition to try and support a committee that is giving some definition and maybe some help for the community to better understand the differences between different folks' approach to that cloud native and cloud hybrid sort of environment that everybody's now talking about. Second, this is something that probably is going to be a lot of help to folks who are thinking innovatively, or just plainly innovators that want to try and create new sorts of solutions. But right now it's hard to identify, well, it's kind of like if I was an app developer, do I develop for Apple and for Android, or one or the other? To try and give some definition to our OT, again, physical cloud hybrid, give folks some predictability on what to expect in terms of the capabilities, and so that's why we're supportive of it.
Yeah,
So
Melissa Boutwell on our planning call mentioned a sort of a thought, which I think is very powerful, is that if you think of somebody that's innovating to do with buildings, right, and they say, okay, I can do X, whatever X is, but I need data, I need an interface to the building, right? The first thing that person or that company will need to do is build a box that's in the past paradigm, and go through all of that installation process and everything else about putting that box in the building, right? Which is a barrier, right? So with something like IBB, it actually reduces that barrier to that innovator, to being able to write something, a piece of software to do X, again, whatever X is. And they won't have, if there is an IBB in the building, they won't have to worry about the hardware installation of the interfaces. That as long as it conforms with the IBB specification, they can go through a process and install it. So it actually encourages innovation it lowers the barrier significantly on innovation.
Yeah. So again, did by any chance on the Wednesday call, did the subject, or was there a mention of the company VEA?
We usually aren't talking about companies specifically.
Yeah. So, because they have a box that
Everybody has a box.
that was announced over a year ago that would seem to fit a lot of this.
I think,
Yeah,
Steve,
and
one of the things is everybody has a box, right? And a
Well,
lot of the
yeah.
boxes can actually conform to this.
Mhm.
Right, and a lot of the applications could conform to a box that conform to this. So the idea of this initiative is actually to define what that conformity is, so that everybody can conform to it. Then it becomes
Okay.
it blows it all wide open in terms of being able to use it.
Got it. Okay, so it's yeah, so it's more to define.
Yes.
What do we really need to have, and then get that specification into the industry, so multiple companies can build a product that does what we're asking it to do.
Yeah, this is not unprecedented in any stretch. You know, it's back in the day when everybody was making a different version of a personal computer, which most people don't remember, but there were lots of different ways. And kind of a de facto standard came about of like, well, if it complies with this Wintel, which, you know, people from Apple hated, but there was this de facto emerging standard of how a server should work, and then how to score, sort of how if you're in the market to buy something innovative or develop some software, you know, to have some predictability and some yardsticks by which to gauge.
I believe one of the tests is that does it run Flight Simulator? Right.
It always was. I was going to save that for later, but that was always the test of whether a computer would be able to run certain business software. Was if it could run Flight Simulator, you were good to go. It would run everything else. But the whole point of starting for people to start to learn what the different feeds and speeds and megabytes and gigabytes and all of that took a while. And I think that as the coalition, we can accelerate the sort of adoption and learning curve by taking on this work.
Would love to hear from Jim and Tracy, because I know you two make some sort of form of boxes because you need to interface, and Anna as well, I think.
Go ahead.
First.
I think that it's this is an initiative we've been talking about for some time, and this is beginning to come together as something that we can have multiple companies get involved with, and hopefully create this stable platform that people can use. I think that, as Anto pointed out, everyone has a box, and largely speaking, a lot of those boxes have looked at creating proprietary platforms. This is an effort on our part to make sure that we're creating an open platform as well, right? So a lot of people stitch together those interoperability layers, or even some of the communication, in proprietary ways. And as that puts a brake on the market, we'd like to have an open solution. Tracy?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. And I think the thing to focus on is that the intent is this is driving the industry to a more open stack in architecture, right? And I've struggled, quite honestly, a bit conceptualizing this, because it's part hardware, potentially part software, part OS, part container, part, there's lots of different terms that have been thrown at this during our discussions. And the answer to all of that is kind of a yes, it is. And so that's the thing to remember when you're trying to conceptualize what this is. But I think what helped me a lot is to keep it at a fairly abstract level right now is the way to go about getting this thing rolling, right? How do we remove proprietariness, if that's a word, proprietariness, out of the industry into something that is more open, probably more closely resembles IT infrastructures and what you see in servers and computers and server farms and so on and so forth, right? I think that's the way to think about why we're interested in doing this. And, you know, if you look at the computer industry as a parallel and what caused that to really explode, it's when a lot of things started becoming, in the case of that industry, de facto standards that everybody just finally agreed on. It wasn't something that was committed by this committee or created by this committee or that committee or anything necessarily. Sometimes it was, you know, initially started by a particular company and then just kind of launched out into the wild as open source, and it became de facto standard. Other times they were adopted from existing standards, but it's that collection of things that really made that industry open up and explode, right? And that's what we're trying to achieve here.
And in fact, you know, one could ask a logical question that if I do eliminate all of those proprietary components, how does one make money? And how does this become a self-fulfilling business model to even have this technology exist? Because you're looking at quite a bit of value, which we're intentionally trying to preserve as open, which is going to make it more difficult for traditional companies who are thinking of owning the platform to make money.
I think the traditional approach to that, Jim Lee, is the Red Hat model, right? Where, you know, if you make it an open platform, there are always you can always buy the do-it-yourself kits and help try and support it yourself, or you know, if you're committed to it, you get someone like not a Red Hat, but an equivalent of a Red Hat who produces an enterprise supported version,
Right?
And that's typically where the money when comes, right?
How much did Red Hat get sold for? Can anyone remember?
32 billion.
Billion
Billion, yeah.
with a B.
With a B, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, and I've struggled with that. What's the business proposition for traditional players around this proposition, right? If you're hardware, if you're dependent on hardware only as your main source of revenue, you know, we already have a commoditization problem in our industry where a lot of the hardware that we use is really getting commoditized. How you buy it, how you know, the sources for it, the functionality. So a lot of value is getting delivered in the software side to a degree. And a lot of the, you know, all the way at the bottom end of this, at the sensor level, I don't think anything changes with this at the sensor level. Sensors and actuators are always going to be needed in this industry to open and close and turn things on and off and move things around.
Can I just challenge you on that? Doesn't this, which makes it easier to get at those sensors, to get at the data, therefore make those sensors more valuable?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
This is a huge enabler, in my opinion.
I'm not
This
implying
actual
any
system.
value change on that.
Yeah.
For sure.
No,
Yeah.
I'm saying
totally
that there is
agree.
value change because you're increasing the value of the sensors because more people can use it, more systems can use it.
If you are a generic third-party sensor manufacturer, for instance, who sells to any number of current controller companies, you're absolutely right about that. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
The other thing is it doesn't, every proprietary system provider out there for fire and life safety, for physical security, for building automation, this doesn't replace any of that.
Correct.
It doesn't control an air handler. It doesn't let you in the door, and it doesn't alert you if if the smoke detector goes off, right? So those businesses continue on. What it does do, though, is it makes it far easier for all those systems to commingle and share their information wherever it needs to go. And it gives them a clear, secure pipe in and out of the building, which is a huge issue right now. It's just an enormous issue to try to get any IT department to let vendors have remote access into their systems, and because there's no standard way it's being done, and everybody's nervous as hell about just the concept of having that system accessible remotely.
yeah, cybersecurity may be the killer app that drives this for sure.
Yep.
So, but conceptually, that's the thing I want to try to get across. And like I said, I still struggle with it in any point in time. Somebody will bring up a good point and it kind of completely shoots down my concept of what all this is. But it does have a very disruptive potential to it, to certain players in the industry currently, who sort of make their money, their profits off artificial benefits, right? Like territories or licensing structures or things that sort of artificially force proprietariness into the solution. So this,
Anno, do you mind chiming in from your perspective, because you're sort of a system integrator-ish, as CBRE. I don't know whether that's the right bucket to put you in, but thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm coming at it from a perspective of, weirdly enough, we're kind of going through this process of evaluating different solutions that are out there at the moment and kind of looking at all the pros and cons, which is not a trivial lift. It's not a trivial exercise to look at each one, and without any real guidance, you got to come up with your own, pseudo standard of what's important to you and what's not important to you. And that varies all over the place, and then you start making compromises. So, from one perspective, having a template, if you will, to say, here's kind of like a guideline of what you want to look for, in these sort of, in this IBB, that goes a long way to getting, from my perspective, internal alignment and like, okay, we've got a mission and a goal. Let's go find out, who's close enough or who's in the ballpark of what we're looking at. So even from that perspective, right, and again, we don't want to be dependent upon any one solution per se. We prefer to have multiple options in that area. And back to my earlier point, if it was specified and open, and then there was a enterprise version that had an enterprise entity that supported it for me, in meaning that
and I think the penultimate point here, securely and remotely managed responsibility. I think that's that point, right? You can get one of these that's sort of open source and supported by, maybe the IT department, but you can actually then think of a business or businesses that will start up and set themselves up to deliver this and manage it and maintain it responsibly and securely as a service. I mean, that's effectively a managed service provider, but very, very specific thing. I would have thought that's one of the most interesting aspects of this. Dennis on chat asked sort of the $6 million question, right? Will manufacturers fall in line with this and support it? Maybe we can.
We've debated that a lot, haven't we?
Yes, we have. And it's a great question, Dennis. Thank you.
Yeah, because that was the problem I was having. I spend some time over the past several weeks, we've been discussing this as a naysayer of this whole effort, in that no manufacturer is going to get behind this. This is a threat to their very way of life, so to speak. So, but others have pointed out on numerous occasions ways that is in examples of how that's not necessarily true, right? And there are a number of the big manufacturers that have already announced things like, we're getting out of the hardware business, or we're going to containerize our entire solution and make it available to port around to different kinds of hardware platforms. And I've seen that both on the BACnet, in the BACnet world and in the LAN world, and both of those kind of blur together, because both of the big entities behind or the big entities behind both those technologies now also support the others. So, but that's kind of interesting. And the idea, Joseph is just posting BACnet initially a threat to the big manufacturers. Yeah, LAN, having lived the LawnWorks stuff, I can talk to the LawnWorks side of that comment. And that was very much the case on the lawn side. When that came out initially, all the manufacturers were, paid the big bucks to join the board of directors, and they were participating in standardizing things around lawn works. But then when they realized that that made their product very replaceable by their competitors' product, it got really uncomfortable. And when BACnet came out, that was a nice standard that was created by an industry association, and it gave them a way to kind of do their own thing and have their own creativity while not exposing themselves to be completely swappable, let's say. So
it occurs to me, going to the point I think Jim raised earlier, that there's probably two distinct camps of manufacturers. If you're a manufacturer that looks at a hardware box as a way to control access to that building, right, then you're going to hate this. But if you're a manufacturer or a vendor that has some kind of innovation that you want to use in the building, and you don't, having to install your own box is a barrier. Therefore, this would be a wonderful thing. So I don't know what the split is between those two categories.
Well,
but I wanted to, sorry, Anna, just real quick. When you, Anto, when you said they're going to hate this, I just wanted to point out that this is also just plain known as progress.
Thank you.
That's why I was the artificial value that they are deriving on some of this. If you look at this a little like in the IT world, Windows and the associated hardware. So you got Microsoft and a bunch of software companies. Originally, somebody mentioned, Anto, I think when you did the announcement, or maybe it was Rick, there was a point at where people made PCs and they provided the OS, they provided the hardware, they provided the printers that connected to it. Everything was from one source and not compatible with the other.
Right.
And then the decoupling that occurred in the industry where Microsoft, the industry standardized kind of on the Windows, if you will, DOS initially, the Windows, and that was decoupled from who was providing the hardware.
Well, yeah, there were specific interface entities. BIOS was there in the hardware, and then the OS was there from the operating system, and they were specified. One
would argue that there were a lot more hardware suppliers after the standardization of in the concept of an OS, right? Yeah. And what happened to some of those mainframe DEC computer, they're gone, right? And there's just a horde of PC manufacturers out there now. So
yeah, I think the other perspective is, anyone who is making a box at the moment, having these sort of industry standards come out, they're the great voice of the customer, right? I mean, the only feedback they're getting from the moment is what they're deploying and what they're doing in their particular space. If I was in the space making boxes, you got to remember there aren't a whole lot of them, right? It's a handful at best. Getting some guidance as to where open standards are and are coming from, and what the needs and use cases are, that's kind of really useful feedback from a product perspective.
My initial view of this is we're just swapping the hardware out from these proprietary pieces of hardware that we're currently using to an embedded PC, basically running Linux. Yeah. Right. And you can buy those for a lot less money with a lot more compute power and a lot more flexibility than you can some of the hardware that's used in our industry right now. And to me, that's kind of scary in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean it's not better for the industry. Right? Still could be better for the industry, even if it's scary to my business in some ways, for instance.
So Ken, you just posted, I need this. Was that?
No, actually, I didn't quite quote that right. I needed that to quite understand, the relationship when the Docker was thrown out as a test. I just wasn't quite sure what that was all about, but that helped. The definition helped me get my mind around it. Maybe just an old guy thing.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, next week we're going to talk about cloud native and what that is all about. This is a term that's really quite important, but it's not the most straightforward of thing to just conceptualize. So we'll have Toby Considine come join us to talk about that.
Good.
And maybe others from the audience will as well.
Yeah, Toby's one of our contributing editors and certainly been had his head in the clouds for a long time.
Okay.
In a good way. Yeah. Steve, maybe I can ask you to wrap this conversation as we're coming up to the top of the hour.
Okay. So what I heard today is that our group here through the C4SB is saying the industry needs a new initiative, not unlike BACnet, to solve a fundamental problem in opening up our buildings to interoperability and the broad use of cloud computing. And because the reality on the ground is that cloud computing has become a fact, and more applications and more businesses are basing their products and technology on the cloud, and in many ways. So we have to break free of the on-prem way of thinking of the business we're in. We have to acknowledge and embrace the cloud, and the minute you do that, it opens up a group of specific challenges to making that all work nicely together. There's the cybersecurity aspects. There's the communication itself going to and from the cloud, to and from the cloud into the control systems that are downstream, and it begs the question of how are all these different systems now going to interoperate seamlessly and securely without having to involve specific vendors, if you will, to solve that problem. So I think the objective here is even more ambitious for sure than BACnet, which was trying to drive a standardization for on-prem communications among dissimilar systems or even similar systems. But here now we're saying, hey, because of the way cloud has come into the world of building control, we've got a much higher level set of challenges to address. Let's see if we can specify what it is we need and drive the industry to come out with products that address this. Because if this, what do you call it? The
IBB.
The IBB. So if the IBB exists, as you're proposing, we've really got something that's going to solve a whole host of problems that we've now found ourselves facing, and with no really good solution. So yeah, that's my summary.
Right. And so for those of you, thank you, Anna, I was just going to mention it, recollecting the history, IBB had a different meaning in the past, and maybe still does in the future. It's also the initials for the Interoperable Blues Band, which was actually started in 2004 when I organized BillCon. And Leighton Wolf came and said, well, how about if we get all of the people in the industry to play in a band together?
Right.
So the Interoperability Building Box is actually like the building, like the band, just bringing everybody together so they can play nice together, and except that there's no beer in the IBB box.
Right.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, so
Actually,
with that, thank you.
The goal is the same too, is to get everybody to beat on the
There you
drum.
go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. I'll get the video out tomorrow, and have a great week. Thank you.
Yep,
Bye-bye.
thanks. Bye.
Bye.